Megan Sweary, and I work at the Papa John Center here at Iowa State. And we have been hosting this Start Something series all around the idea of side hustles. And today we're going to be talking about technical and freelance consulting. To kick things off, I want to talk a little bit about etiquette first. It's great that some of you are already using the chat. That's how we'll communicate throughout today's session. So if you're a participant, please stay muted, but feel free to ask any questions throughout the session in the chat. And also just an FYI for our presenters and everybody online, this is being recorded for YouTube to share after the fact. So just keep that in mind today. So with that, let's jump right in. And I want to start by first having our panelists introduce themselves. And so whoever wants to start can go for it. We can go in the order of the screen if that's easiest.
Yeah, it seems like that's probably going to be easier. So I'll go ahead and get going. My name is Brandon Carlson. I am a consultant in the software engineering space. More specifically, I work with companies to help them with their digital transformation and agile transformation processes. So it's a lot of fun. I've been doing it since 2011. So.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. This is Dave Sly. I started actually as a college student, so I'll just start there with people in the mid 1980s with PC consulting when it was a very new product, mostly on the CAD side or engineering side. AutoCAD had just come out, so I started a business teaching people how to use AutoCAD and writing macros and programs to integrate AutoCAD CAD models to other systems. And actually really got my start, funded myself through grad school that way. So, but the other thing that I ended up doing is developing some products around that space, industrial engineering software solutions. And I think, you know, it ended up going from side hustle to full business. And there was an interesting transition in there, but that's kind of where my background is.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dillon Jensen. I'm a current student at Iowa State, about to graduate. What I do is not exactly freelancing, but I do have a business with my brother, who also just graduated, doing cloud monitoring devices and custom work relating to IoT or Internet of Things, basically just taking real world interaction and connecting it to the cloud or to the internet or to other things. It's basically just another level of automation. And I have a startup business that I've been running for the last 2 years or so now, doing things like that. And I'm definitely not as well established as Brandon and Dave are in this field, but I can give you a probably more relatable student perspective on it. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all. So first, I just want to start by talking about what is technical consulting, and anybody can answer this. So if any of you feel compelled to kind of give your opinion on what you think technical consulting is, maybe we can start there to help somebody who might not be as familiar with the idea.
I guess I could start here too. You know, when I think of technical consulting, a lot of us have imposter syndrome, right? And so we think that we don't know enough to help other people. We think, well, I'm not smart enough to get paid to do this. Well, what I found is that, you know, there's a lot of people out there that maybe don't have the same skills as you. And so technical consulting is, for me, is people reach out or you go find clients, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this session, but people reach out because they have a gap between what their skills are or what their capacity is and their need. So from a technical perspective, whether, like you said on here, the website development, app development, all different types of technical gaps, they need somebody to help come fill that gap on a temporary basis. So you come in and fill that gap and act as like an advisor from a technical perspective to help them solve the problems that they've identified that they have gaps in. I don't know, how's that, Dave and Dillon?
Good. I think the only thing I'd add on that would be that, you know, I think technical consulting is like any other service anyone buys. So we, in a way, we all are customers of technical consulting. You know, if your car breaks down and you don't have a shop or you don't know how to fix it, you look for the person who does. So really in this whole session, I think it's about how do you become the kind of person that you go to for problems that you don't have the tools or expertise to solve. And the idea is, of course, then that the people that you're going to can do the job better and potentially faster and also likely at a lower cost, provided that you have the skills to do it at all yourself anyway.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that. I think that's a pretty good description. I mean, there's a lot of domains that you can encounter in business that would require a specific skill set if you want it done well or you want it done fast. And so, as much as you'd like to be good at every individual aspect of a business, there's people that are just going to specialize in something, and somebody who spends all their time in one area will always be better than somebody who splits their time over a lot of different areas if all factors are considered. So in this case, yeah, if you're trying to start a business but you don't know how to code an app or anything, and somebody can come along and code the app for you, that can speed up your process quite a bit and solve a lot of problems for you and a lot of headaches. So I think any problem that you have that requires domain expertise, that you can go to someone who is a domain expert and basically just have them handle almost the entire process. That's what I would consider technical consulting. And I guess the only way I would distinguish this from something else, which would be a little more creative, is that this would be more of an objective technical consulting. Like something like coding or app is a little bit different than logo design, but a lot of the basics, I think, would be the same.
Awesome. Thanks.
I think I'll add one more thing
Yeah.
on here. That word consulting, there's I would say there's two different kind of models. There's a consulting model and there's a contracting model. Okay. And contracting model typically is, your car, going back to Dave's analogy, because I had a good abstract, weird answer. Dave's analogy is very concrete. Like your car, you know that you need the oil change. Your car probably told you that you need the oil change. It probably said, hey, change oil soon, right? So you go to Jiffy Lube or you go somewhere and you pay somebody to change the oil, right? You know what the job needs to be done. You just need somebody to do it because that's not in your wheelhouse. That's what I would consider to be the contracting model, right? Here's the job, go out, do it, and then give it back to me. On the other hand, if your car's acting up and your check engine light comes on and you go to the car mechanic, they're going to do a bunch of testing and do a bunch of stuff on it. They're going to do some diagnosis and they're going to say, hey, I'm going to recommend you do this. I'm going to recommend you do that. I'm going to recommend you do that. And now that's more the consulting model, where consulting, you're going to be a part of the solutioning and a part of some of the solution versus just being handed a solution and being told to implement it. So I think it's important for you to know what kind of model you're getting into, who you're working with, because some people don't want you to ask a lot of questions. They just want you to get it done. And other people want to, they want to have you help them solve the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an awesome analogy. Cool. I think that really helps. Thanks. So now let's jump into how to get started. So maybe each of you could talk about how you got started in technical consulting and maybe some tips that you have from your experience.
I can get started on this one. So I started, I think as anyone should, by doing it myself. In my particular case, I was in an evolving market. I was in the PC back when I was a college student. When the PC was so new, I was actually a lab monitor. And so I became kind of a very well-educated person in the technology, whether it was a particular software program or the PC in general or the domain I was working in. And then I started helping others. I trained others and I went to other organizations and helped them. So I think the getting started is about putting yourself in an environment where you're going to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, that you're willing to make an investment in yourself so that you have the skills, but more importantly, as importantly, the referenceability. So I ended up with a situation where I had been engaged, involved in so many groups that I had the situation, say, look, I did this at John Deere, I did this at Maytag, I did this at Danfoss. And in some cases, the first few of those I didn't charge for, like Sears, which was a store, actually, I think they're still around, had an automotive area, and they, the regional manager asked if I would write a program to manage their sales. This was really early, 1985, of what they sold and which mechanic did it, so they could give the mechanic a commission. So I wrote that program as a college student for Sears for free, just to get the expertise. And I learned a lot, and they really liked it in the end. And then I could go and say, I wrote this system for them and show people what I wrote. And then I got my first paid gigs off of that.
Awesome.
I was going to add to that too. The way that I got started in craft beer actually was I was trying to develop my own technical skill set, both out of just curiosity and as a hobby, but also like thinking ahead for my career. So I was in high school when I started learning how to program and get into software and things like that. And I had a neighbor who owned a local craft brewery, and he basically had this idea for a project where because they collect so much data about their beer manually, they wanted to automate some of it and look at their brewery from a new perspective, like with more data and with more proof of what they think about their beer and proof that it's going the way that it should or shouldn't, and hopefully optimize their beer over time because of that. And so because I was just looking for the experience and maybe something to put on my resume to help me get into college or do whatever, I basically just went there over a few summers, and I made a lot of trips to this brewery and helped them set up this very custom project with like Arduinos and stuff to track a lot of the data that was happening in the brewery. And so I didn't get paid for that. I mean, I guess they gave me some off the table beer every once in a while or whatever, but it wasn't like a paid gig, and I wasn't really looking for that. I just, it was fun, but I also just wanted the experience and to sort of see if I can do it and also prove myself. And so then later on, that when I founded the business with my brother, which is focusing on doing a very similar thing basically for breweries, except on a mass scale rather than on a one by one custom scale, it was a lot easier to talk to breweries and to sort of have a good basis for knowing what their problems are like and what it's actually like to implement, because I'd already done it before and I had this great experience. And that's something that they probably wouldn't have wanted to pay me for anyways. So I think doing the first few jobs or something like that for free or really reduced prices is a good way to prove your credibility and also prove to yourself that you have what it takes to actually implement the job if you were to get one.
That's cool. Yeah, my journey started. I was a full-time engineer, software engineer, and in technology, people switch jobs every 2 years or so, right? So I was a job jumper. Every couple of years, I'd take different jobs, and what I did is I started taking management jobs in the software engineering space, and then I would help them digitally transform the company I worked at. And during that time, I started a couple of community groups, and I started going out and, doing things like this, like Dillon's doing. And what that did was that got my name out there as somebody that had knew what they were talking about in the space that I was in, right? So it starts building that word of mouth, that reputation and your brand almost, right? And then I just happened to be, things came into alignment. I was speaking at a conference in Florida. Guy came up to me and said, I'd really like your services. Would you be willing to come to Des Moines, Iowa every week and consult for us? And I said, I live in Des Moines, Iowa. And he said, what? And that person was from John Deere. And so they brought me on. And then I was in the process of leaving my last job already. So just timing worked out. And then I started. So I think what I had going for me, Dillon and Dave gave you one path, which is do some free stuff, get your name out there. My path was a little different. I had gotten my name out there through doing events like this, focused on my topic area. And then folks started saying, well, if this person is traveling all over the world to speak at these conferences, he's clearly credible to do the work for me, right? Now, whether I was actually capable or not, that doesn't matter. The perception from the clients was that I had credibility because I appeared to be knowledgeable in this space. So I never did any free. Yes, I had some experience from other work experiences. So it wasn't like I was in college and just trying to make a name for myself. But I also think that another route is, where's your social proof? Because people look at that, companies look at that. Where, what else did they do? Who else do I know that they have worked with? And those kinds of things, and then build that credibility, and then you can get in the door.
You've all sort of talked about it, but I do, if there's anything else to add on the topic of when you should start charging for your work and how you know that you're ready to do that. I think it already came up a few times that a lot of times we don't feel like we should be charging or we're ready to be charged. So do you guys have anything else to add on that topic?
I think you should be charging from day one.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, if you have the skill set, I think, Brandon's case, he took something he learned to do at his job full time and spun it off. So I think if you have skills that are marketable, and there is the context of this, I was a little confused. What constitutes a gig, right? Is it a side gig to going to school? Is it a side gig to working another job? You have to be a little careful, if you're working full time for John Deere, for example, and then you start doing some side consulting for Case New Holland, right, in your field of work. So, you've got to think about what constitutes a side gig. I think that if you don't have expertise, like in my case, I think Brandon's case, we're both college students, or Dillon's case, so we're both college students when we started. So like many of the people on this call, we didn't have a full-time job. We never had a full-time job. And so what makes our time worthwhile, right? Why would someone pay us? And so I think that the question is, do you pay to go to school, or will you, are you going to do something for somebody for free if need be to gain the expertise, or for a very low fee? It's a great question. It's a tough one. When I, or how much you charge, that's another question. When I started doing consulting as a college student, I was getting paid $7.50 an hour at the lab. I did do some work at $15 an hour, and then I raised to 30, and then I moved up to 60, and then I went to 100. Now, $100 an hour doesn't sound like a lot today, but that was 1985. And when I was a senior in college, I brought in $35,000, which once again doesn't sound like much money today. But in 1985, a starting industrial engineer made $25,000. So I was making $10,000 more than I would had I gotten a job. So I think that what constitutes side gig, what constitutes how to get started in the business, it's all about investment in yourself. What does it take to get the skills you need to do what it is that you want to do? And then is it really a side gig, or is it a full gig? I'm still wondering. I call it a side gig because I did it while I went to school, but it eventually, like in Dillon's case, it turned into my full-time career. So now my side gig is working on Porsches, right? But it's just kind of funny how that works.
I'll clarify real quick. When I said you should charge from day one, I think there's always a market for talent, right? And the longer you wait to try to start charging, the more opportunity you're missing out on. So let's say, like if you guys wanted me to do some of your math assignments, you probably wouldn't pay me much, especially if you saw that I had no math credentials, right? I can do compound interest, and that's about the best I got, right? So the value that you would get from me is zero, right? If I do a bunch of gigs at zero, I don't really know what I'm worth, right? So for me, you should walk into it with the expectation that you should pay me for my time. Now, I might come in and say, it's going to cost you $10,000 for me to do this. And they say, no, I'm not willing to pay you that. Right? So if they're not willing to pay me for that, then I can't get that gig. Or I could say, okay, what would you be willing to pay me for that gig? And if they say, well, you don't have enough experience, I don't think I'm willing to pay for that gig. So it's like, okay, you can make the choice now and say, I want to do that gig for free because I get the experience. Or you've set an expectation for what your time is worth, right? So if they say, I would pay you 5,000 for that gig, then you're worth $5,000, right? So for me, I don't think it's that I'm saying that thou shalt never do anything for free, but I am thinking that if you start doing it for free, how do you ever know what your value is? And how do you know when you're good enough, right? So that would be my clarification.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And you kind of touched on this idea of gaining experience, which is what I wanted to talk about next. So how have you gained your experience? It sounds like there's a mix, maybe doing some things for free or other options. And along that same line, when you're gaining experience, when did you decide to niche down, or have you decided to niche down to like a certain amount of offerings that are really specific? So I guess two-part question. How do you gain experience? And then as you're gaining experience, do you decide to niche down or not? And why?
I think on the, I talked about experience and my personal experience, the gaining experience. And you're right. I think there are a lot of ways. I don't think we're all saying the same thing. There are different ways to get that experience, but it's important to get it right. The question is, you had niche down or niche up. I think it depends a lot upon the market that you've chosen. I have found in my life that I've niched down when confronted with a lot of competition, and I've niche up, or if you are unniche and go broader when there really isn't a definable group of people or a big enough market segment to justify what I'm trying to accomplish, right? There's just not enough people willing to pay for X. So I have to broaden my skills and capabilities, which is usually easier to do when there's not a ton of people, right? But niching down, if you're really good at what you do, can give you a really great price to reward ratio. Okay. I remember a comment, it was a joke, I'm sure, where somebody said, hey, they came in and they fixed something. And it took them 10 minutes and they gave them a $10,000 bill. And the joke was, well, hold it. You can't charge me $10,000 for 10 minutes, He says, you only spent 10 minutes. They said, hey, fixing the problem was only $100. Knowing what problem to fix was $9,900. And niching gives you some of that.
You guys are just dropping nice little tidbits of knowledge here. Dillon, did you have anything to add?
No, but I'm glad Dave said that analogy. I've heard a similar story or joke or like situation where there was like a cruise ship or something, and it was fixed basically by one guy smacking a hammer in a spot for a few minutes or something, and it was the same thing. You're getting paid for the expertise and not the time. I'm pretty sure it's a later slide, so I'll wait to touch on it. But yeah, pricing for time versus project is interesting too. In terms of how to get experience, I definitely, and this maybe is a more generalized thing, but I definitely think that you can get most experience and you can get really good at something not having to like pay or like have some specialized like degree in it. Don't get me wrong, if you have a degree and I'm in computer science, so that's very relevant for what I'm doing. But even if you weren't, or you had some other skill set that you're using for whatever you're trying to consult for, it seems like if you just like are very active in doing that, and you read books about it and you get different perspectives on like people that have done it in the past, but maybe trends evolve. So like you just kind of want to look at like a few different ways. For example, Dave did a lot of computer consulting and similar type of work for the time. Obviously, it's not like today is the same as it was back in 1985, but there's still pieces of advice and things like that I could take from him, like the thing that he just said about the billing for the amount of value that you provided and like the expertise that you have had. But honestly, most of my experience comes from just like personal, like just grinding it out. Honestly, I've gone through a lot of like really thick books on just various software practices, and then I can apply that at, you know, a customer or something like that, and then it just sort of builds off each other. But I don't think that there's any way to become confident in like what you're actually doing without just doing it like a lot. Like I think it just takes time.
That's good advice. We're getting a lot of great interaction in the chat. If anybody has questions, please add them there. I love all the comments though. That's great to see you all interacting. So next we're going to talk about this idea of selling technical services. I think we've touched on it quite a bit, but this service space, a product is pretty easy to price because you know exactly what it's worth and it's pretty easy to assign a value to that. But services and your value behind your service can be a little bit harder. And so the first question is, how do you confidently sell your services, which in turn is mostly like selling yourself? Any advice there?
I don't know. I was thinking one of the experiences that I've learned as a consultant, or, you know, is always answer with "it depends," because then you sound like really smart, like you know all the nuances to everything. So I kind of want to answer "it depends" here, so that way I can make you guys think I'm really smart. I feel like getting the confidence in selling, the way you get confidence is by doing something and being successful at doing something and learning stuff. So how do you become confident at selling? I think you just have to do it more. Like I was super nervous on that first, even though they basically said, "we want you," on that first gig. I went in and had the proposal and everything there, and I was freaking out. I was like, what if they ask me about this? What if they ask me about this? But now I've done, you know, hundreds of proposals, and it's just kind of like, I know I can deliver. I'm confident I can deliver because I'm confident in what I know. And, I try to make sure that the client is the right client for me and they're going to work with me. So I ask more questions about like, I basically try to get the client to sell me on why we should work with them. Right. Instead of the other way around where I was always nervous. So I don't really have a good answer on that one. I think it's a tough one to build that confidence, but what did you guys think, since I didn't do a good job of answering?
I thought that was good, actually. And I think, like, along with that is creating confidence with you, like you said, like with the client as well. And so, I mean, these are usually big investments. So maybe we can talk from that side of it too, is how to, be confident that you're going to deliver, but also be able to portray that you're confident that you'll be able to deliver at that value.
So I think that first of all, I would I would disagree with your comment that products are easy to price. I think products are tough to price also, because what a product is worth has a lot to do with, its location. For example, take the classic marketing question: how much would you pay for a bottle of Coke? Well, it depends if I'm in Hy-Vee or if I'm at Hilton Coliseum on a 100-degree day, right? I might pay a different price, or a glass of beer. But I think that I think when you're selling technical services, the question for you have a similar problem in that you also have to be fair. You've got to be trustworthy and responsible. And even though that, let me step back. If that customer's factory is down, they're losing $100,000 a minute, and they call me and ask me for help, and I can get them up to speed in 10 minutes. What's that worth? Okay. But the question is, can I charge that same amount when they call me on a situation that isn't as dire? So you can't always price to value. What you have to be is seen as someone who can get the job done, who's reliable. And sometimes they're going to get a great deal for what you have to offer. And sometimes it may be harder to quantify the value that you deliver. And I think that it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to price when it's very specific of what it is you can do for them. Okay. And it's a lot harder to price when the requirements are open. And so I think to some extent, a lot of technical sales is about building a relationship with the person you're helping, and requires a lot of listening, which good sales skills always does, to really understand what they're trying to accomplish and help them plot a course. I think the best consultant is someone that asks questions and enough questions and offers guidance when asked for the customer to come up with the answer themselves, as opposed to telling the customer what it is they should do.
Absolutely 100% back. Agree with that.
I like what Dave said about being fair, not just ethically, but also business wise. I think it's the best strategy in the long run. For example, if you're in Dave's scenario and a factory that's losing like a lot of money in a very short amount of time, they're very desperate for help. Like in this moment, he could overcharge them, and they would know that he's overcharging them, and they would pay it, and they would be probably resentful about it and say, yes, like we need your help. So I won't be happy about it, but I will pay you some, triple charge, which is solely because you know how desperate we are. But that's not exactly a good step in creating a relationship. And I feel like once that problem is fixed and they have downtime and they can reevaluate, are we going to keep giving work and good recommendations to, and like be a good reference for Dave if he's just going to take advantage of us every time we're weak? Like, I doubt it. So I feel like playing the long game in terms of like lifetime customer value, like for us, we're currently doing a custom job for a local AIMS startup, and I think we're charging them less than what it's probably worth. But at the same time, we're a small company, they're a small company, money's tight for both of us. But also I know that in the long run, if they come to us again for more work, especially larger projects that could be 10 times as big as the one that we're currently doing, that would be much more beneficial in the long run. So rather than try to juice out every single dollar that we could possibly get, I'd rather have a relationship that prospers over time and creates more projects rather than just the absolute most for any given project.
Another
Yeah.
awesome answer.
Yeah, all around awesome feedback. So along those lines, how do you all go about attracting projects or partnerships, like with these long-term relationships with companies that you want or that you think are going to be a good match for you and your talents?
I mean, I kind of showed you how I got started. I mean, at being an industrial engineer, knew how to program. I guess I was kind of predisposed to working on industrial-oriented programming, right? But I think your skill set, in a way, kind of defines your industry. And I'm saying that in terms of the type of skills that you wish to do, because it has to be something you enjoy as well as something you're good at. And that's where that issue of how deep do you go, and I don't know if there's a right answer for that. But I think if you're really good at something and it's very niche of what you do, then your market's going to be a lot easier to define, and people are going to know about you just through word of mouth, which I think is in referenceability, which I don't think you can get past. I mean, in consulting and in selling yourself, that's what you've got. You're only as good as the last project you did. And so it's very important to make sure that people know what you're doing and communicate that. And social media makes that easier today than it ever has been. But it means that you need to keep doing really good work for people and keep professing it. But I think when you issue the point you bring up here, focus on what you do best, the word focus is important because you're still, at the end of the day, one person. We're talking about a side gig. We're talking about selling yourself, selling your technical services. We're not talking about starting a business of 100,000 people. That's a little different, and focus can take on a very different perspective in that context. But when it's just you, and maybe it's just you between 5 and 9, I believe that was one of the driving factors of this. It's pretty darn important to pick something that you can do with really very little risk of failure, right? And you can do reliably and quickly and efficiently and make money at, and something you enjoy. it's almost going to define that focus. And by definition, that will help you market yourself by just showing all the cool stuff you did.
Awesome. Brandon, did you have anything to add on that?
I was just gonna piggyback on Dave's and just say, do a good job for your clients, especially as a part of a side hustle, and your clients know people, right? And if you just do a good job for your clients, that'll get you a long way from a referenceability and all that kind of stuff. So I was just gonna make sure I reiterated that, so.
Awesome. So next I'd like to dive even deeper into pricing and talk about what all is considered when you're thinking about how much you're going to charge for a service.
Well, I think Dave talked about this a little bit, but like how niche is your service is going to go into it, right? I can't remember what you said exactly, Dave, about the requirements. If the system's down, if the assembly line's down, that's a different need than, that context is different than just a open-ended, hey, we want to improve our business processes or something like that. It's a little harder to pin down. So I definitely think there's a lot that go into it, but I saw we had Fiverr and some of those other Upwork, I think on an earlier slide. And if you are doing Java software engineering, there's tons of Java developers all over the world. So when you have folks that are going to want to get a small project done, like a side hustle type project, they can go to Fiverr or Upwork and they can find people to do it for dirt cheap. So you're not going to be able to put a premium price on something, on a commodity type of work, type of labor. So I think the relationships matter. I think the size of the market matters, some of those kinds of things.
And maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about like pricing structures. So a couple of options I listed here was doing projects like on an hourly basis versus a project basis, and like maybe having published rates, which are just what you do for everything, versus negotiating based on the project. So does anybody have anything around those types of things specifically? So your structure or strategy?
Personally, I've always leaned towards the contracts entire pricing, because I feel like if you do anything hourly, that can hurt you or it can hurt your customer, neither of which is good. And so, for example, if you're going to do a job and you estimate it to be, I don't know, 50 hours of total work or something like that, if it takes you a lot shorter than that, then your customer is overpaying the amount of hours that are being paid. But if you do it shorter than that and you only bill for the hours that you actually did, then you hurt yourself, because your expertise, just because you're good at something and you can fix a cruise ship in 10 minutes, or you can fix an assembly line in 10 minutes, the amount of expertise that it took to get there, and if you only base it off of time, you're definitely hurting yourself. I think it's fine if you were doing something that has a lot of competition. So for example, Brandon just mentioned how if you're trying to freelance Java, then there's a lot of competition. It might just come down to a dollars and cents thing. You might just have to publish your rate. But if you do something and you're good at it, and because of how good you are and all your expertise, you're able to do it fast, that shouldn't hurt you. I can only find X amount of projects and I do them twice as fast as everybody else, and so I make half as much money. That seems like an absolute waste. So and on the flip side of that is, if you take longer than expected, it hurts your customer as well, because they thought they were going to pay you for 50 hours or something, and you went over that. You made yourself look bad. You overcharged, or they spent more than they wanted to pay. And so I just tend to do an upfront, or my business, I guess I should say, we try to go solely for contracts that are based upon completion of some agreed upon terms, so that if we can do it faster than we anticipated, that's great. And if we do it slower than we anticipated, then we need to look back at ourselves and see what went wrong, why we didn't do it as fast or as efficient as we thought we could have. But the customer the entire time knows what it'll cost and can be happy with that.
So, go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say that I think that it depends. I mean, in my past as a student, I did all of those. as a company, a pro planner, we do all of those. Our hourly rates tend to be fairly high, and they are really for short things that have no clear objective, no super clear, not exactly specified. You know, sometimes you run into a situation where writing a spec could cost a lot more than just, you know, having somebody work on something for 3 hours and do it. I think that one thing that is important that I've learned over time, though, is that if you have something that's somewhat complicated, then it's really important to get a very clear specification. And it's important to recognize that in many industries, especially architecture and civil engineering and all, people pay for that. People don't expect you to spend 12, 14, 30 hours putting together a spec for something so that you can quote it, right? So if the specification isn't clear, then it's appropriate, I think, to create a project to define the spec, to quote the project.
Yep, I would agree with that. And then the other thing that Dave, you had started saying that is exactly where I was going is typically when we start looking at hourly versus project-based, it really boils down in my mind to uncertainty. You know, if you've built the same thing or done the same thing 47 times, you probably know roughly how long it's going to take you. You might get it done sooner, you might get it done later. But if there's a lot of uncertainty, like, you know, you're bringing a new product to market and you're going to contract with them to do, I think, Dillon, you mentioned earlier the design project, like we're going to design a logo or a website. Well, there's a lot of uncertainty in what the customer wants, what the requirements are. And to Dave's point, getting them to pin all that stuff down and be precise about how long it's going to take is difficult, right? So for us, if the outcome is really clear, we need to build this thing to do this, we will do a fixed bid price. But if it's, I want to build a product that can manage X, well, we don't even know what manage X looks like. And it takes 6 months just to figure that out. So there's too much uncertainty. So we tend to lean towards time and material for things that are going to, or if they get halfway down building the thing to manage X and then the requirements change, now you're back in this endless cycle of like spinning. So we found time and material works better there because we don't expect the customer to pin everything down up front, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think talking about those two scenarios is a good distinction. I think that's helpful for sure. So we've talked a little bit about finding projects already, so we can go pretty quickly through this slide. But one thing I wanted to ask is, one, how do you find new projects if maybe you don't have anybody giving you referrals yet? And then when you do projects, do you all intentionally ask for referrals? And if you do, how do you do that?
We typically just kind of organic referrals is how we've grown, is through organic. So we don't specifically ask, we solve customers' problems, help them solve their problems. And then they talk to their friends about it, right? So we've been very fortunate. We haven't had to do that. I think one thing that I would throw out there is, you know, there are a lot of, depending on what you do, like I'm going to focus on software engineering because because that's kind of my background, but there are a lot of firms out there that already have relationships with lots of clients that you could go and network and meet with some of those other consulting firms and then use that as a springboard to say, hey, here's my availability. They're going to interview, they're going to do all the normal stuff, but now you don't have to go find the clients because you can let the bigger firms find the clients for you and subcontract to those firms. And that's a good way to get experience and you know, just get started without having to do the hard work of going out and selling and doing all these kinds of things. You can find an existing firm that already has relationships and see if you can 1099 or subcontract through them. That's one way I've seen it done.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to make sure that we get to this idea of like actually scoping a project. So is anybody willing to talk about the process when a project first starts? So maybe what that initial meeting looks like, scoping out the project, making sure expectations are aligned between yourself and the client.
I mean, I think I can try to do that. I said that a little bit before. As I get older, I get a lot less inclined to want to do all the project design work upfront for free. And many of the projects we get involved with, the companies just simply are unprepared to know really what they want. And when you're in technical consulting, if you don't have a clear objective and outcome and everyone agrees to what you're going to do and what's going to look like when you're done, then there's a pretty high chance that you're going to spend a lot of time coming up with an answer that you think meets their needs, only for them to either change their mind or finally develop what it is they want. At which point now the project starts. When you think you're done, they think you just got started. I've been on too many of those. So I think that, once again, unless I know the customer really well and it's very clear what they want, I will basically interview them, as I mentioned, with lots of questions. And the objective of this is a couplefold: for me to learn what they want and for them to learn that they don't know what they want, which often is the case, which then leads to the paid consulting project to get the paid consulting project. And so that at the end of that project, we have a clear set of objectives. We have a mock-up of the user interface and the reports and the workflows, and everybody's signed off, and the data models are signed off, and the different departments that run the different IT systems that we're interfacing with have signed off, and the users have signed off, right? In that case, now I'm in a better position to put together the project timeline and the price and all that, right? I found also that sometimes people are unaware of what things really cost. I was on a project once where the guy said to me, I gave him a quote for around $300,000. And he said to me, look, you're insane. We wrote this ourselves for 40 grand. We're not going to pay 300,000 for you to write a commercial version of what we are mocking up and are using just fine. So then I sat down and I did this interview process, and we finally found out that they spent a lot more than 40 grand, actually, when they actually counted the fact that they pay people in their company, which they didn't realize they were doing. And that in actuality, this was costing them around 200,000 to 300,000 a year, and had been for the last 10 years. But when the manager found that out, there was a little bit of a shock and awe within their own internal organization, and they reevaluated a lot of things with the project. My point is that people sometimes just don't know what they don't know, and that's part of what we need to do. And I think that the other thing I get to, when to say no for a project, there's a lot of articles out there, when to fire your customer. And I don't know a better way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I don't work for assholes, okay? And I know that's a really nasty thing to say in this group, but I just haven't found a better way to make my point, okay? And I've said that to my customers as well. And what I mean by that is this: it's working with people is a relationship, and relationships are bi-directional. You respect me, I respect you. That means we respect our people, we respect our confidentiality, we respect our knowledge, we respect our personal space, we respect our respective business models, right? There are many customers out there that are just willing to get, $10 worth of services for $2, and they don't really care about you or your company or your people or your business model or respecting others. And I don't work for them. And it's really, really important. That comes back to relationship, to understand at the very beginning that this is a group of people that you would want to go out to dinner with. This is a group of people that you trust. This is a group of people you enjoy working with, because life's too short to work for people who are mean, who are dishonest, right? Who are a whole bunch of things. And unfortunately, the real world is full of those kinds of people. I'd like to tell you it's not true, but it is true. So I think it's really important to make sure that there's a good personal fit and a relationship fit between you and the people that you're working with before you engage in a business transaction, which could go down very poorly if there's not a good agreement. And one last thing, contracts are worthless, okay? Because at the end of the day, if there's a disagreement, It's your word against theirs. And now you have to go to arbitration and to legal. I'm not saying totally worthless, and I do have contracts, but at the end of the day, it's back to relationships. Because the cost of trying to sue someone and actually get paid always, and in my experience in almost 40 years of business, has in 100% of the times exceeded my loss. Okay, so if I lost 100 grand, the question is, am I going to spend 180 grand to get it back? Okay, so if you don't have the respect, the contracts provide a nice framework of how you both agree to conduct yourselves in this relationship. And so the contract for me is a roadmap of when to fire my customer.
Absolutely agree with all of that. That's hard to follow up with. But
personally,
yeah, I will add something that I learned from my divorce attorney to piggyback on top of what Dave said, is that he said, when we were talking about our divorce, we had all the paperwork for custody, all the stuff. And he said to me, he said, you know what? He said, Brandon, nothing on this piece of paper matters. You don't have to follow any of it. Said the only time that this piece of paper matters is when you don't get along, right? Because then you're going to look at that again. So as long as your relationship's good with your client's happy, you're happy, it really doesn't matter much what's on that piece of paper. Do you agree with that, Dave? Yeah, so I want to second what he was saying there. And so I think the other thing that I've experienced with setting expectations, a lot of times David talked about the customer doesn't really know what they want. A lot of times I see the customer will say, you go and you do this thing for them and then you show it to them and they say they don't like it, or you get stuck and you say, hey, I don't know what I should be doing here. So then you send it to the customer and you say, how do you want us to handle X? Well, then the customer never responds, right? You never get a clear answer from them on how they want to handle X. So I think setting the expectations with the customers of how quickly they can turn around things and say, hey, it's going to impact your ability to, or my ability to deliver on this solution unless I get responses from you, quickly, because we've seen so many projects get delayed and stalled out and go longer than they should have because the client actually, since they don't fully understand what they want, they don't get back to you because they don't know how to figure that out. And so I think making sure that it's not a handoff. It's not a here, you're going to go do my project and we're never going to talk until the project's done. I think making sure that there's expectations on both sides, that you're going to respond quickly, those kinds of things are pretty important too. So
that's kind of the perfect little intro into our next slide about how you manage your clients. So how often, maybe we could start just by asking how often you communicate with your customers and how you do make sure they understand what those expectations are before you get started, or what you do throughout the process if they're not keeping up their end of the timeline.
Well, you typically have at least weekly meetings with them where we can talk about, here's what we accomplished this week, here's what we accomplished, plan on accomplishing next week, here are the things that are slowing us down. And so we typically have at least like a weekly touch point with most of ours to kind of keep everybody on the same page as to progress.
Yeah, we have frequent contact just to stay transparent about the status of what's going on and what we anticipate, because you can set like an expected completion date or deliverables at the beginning before you started work, but there can always be things that come up like within the project that would delay or modify those somehow. But I think if you have frequent contact, then it's pretty easy to gradually like both stay on the same page as that scope. If it does ever change or the deadline moves up or it moves back or whatever, then everybody's on the same page. And that seems to avoid, to be fair, the volume of customers that Brandon and Dave have worked with have been much greater than us, but we've never really had anybody who is super unhappy with us as of recent because like of projects going too long or anything else like that, just because we're constantly talking. And so nobody's ever surprised if they hear an update about oh, there's a problem that might come up or something. We warn about potential problems and hiccups like as soon as we see them before we've even really crossed them. So that transparency seems to be pretty helpful.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that is the word scope creep. I think that's where we get back to the issue of a very clear and detailed spec. And when someone asks for something different, it's very common that they will, that it's clearly defined as such, which is possible to do because you had a really clear objective statement written out on paper. If you don't have that, if you don't have a very clear, just, well, we're going to write this tool to, automate what you're doing today. Well, what are you doing today, right? You do lots of things today. And so you have to very clearly specify that. And that's where you have to say, look, this is additional item and how are we going to handle this? And we talked about pricing in the past. This is an easy one where I think I've made a lot of mistakes in the past where, oh, that won't take me long. I'll just go ahead and do that. You really need to avoid doing that because then you do that again and again and again. And then eventually you start charging for it and then they get mad at you. So you just need to start to get in the habit of, that's on this other item. Does that replace an item on our list? Is this a swap or is this an additional item? And if it's an additional item, we need to talk about how that's going to be paid for. And also what that does to the contract term. One of the things that we struggle with a lot is that at the beginning of our objective statement, not only do we have what we do, but we also now clearly state what the customer agrees to do. So if the customer agrees to give us this data file of these fields by this day, and they don't do it, what's the remedial action for that? Because that could cause us harm financially, right? That puts our project at risk. And I can tell you that a lot of times those customers who don't meet the end of the bargain are the same ones that make sure to chastise you, when you're late. So it's very important that to the communication that both Brandon and Dillon brought up is to make sure that everyone is aware of the impact of missing the things they've agreed to do.
And I'm going to throw one more thing on there, the requirements conversation, right? You have to be whenever you think you're done, there's more details that you're omitting, right? I use the example all the time that here at the office of, a client says, I need functionality to reset the user's password. Okay, well, that seems pretty benign, right? Reset password. We've all done it a million times. We understand that. Well, when you reset password, you might take and ask them for their ask them for their email address, and you generate an email, and then you have to have that email expire with a link in it, and then they can go reset their. So, maybe you say that's going to take you 4 days. Well, there's also, you could actually have a lost password link that says, call this number, and it's the phone number of the company's customer service who already has the ability to reset a password, right? Well, but now all you have to do is you have to add a phone number to a web page, which, as you can imagine, probably takes 5 minutes rather than 3 days, right? So every time you think you're clear on a password or on a requirement, you better double check, because there's multiple different ways of implementation on that could be wildly different. So it's very difficult to get really good detailed requirements. It's time consuming. So managing scope's hard.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end of the hour, but I want to make sure we pause. And if anybody has questions, please share them in the chat. I want to thank all three of you so much for being here with us today. You shared so much valuable information. I think my main takeaway today is that relationships and transparency matter a ton in this world of consulting. So thank you for sharing that. If anybody has questions, please chat. I also want to give a couple shout outs for events that are coming up in the next few weeks. So next week is our last workshop in this series. It's all about real estate. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and register for our final one. On Monday, we're also hosting improv pitch competition. So if you're a student and you would like to pitch and have a chance to win $100, I encourage you to sign up for that. There's only a few spots left. And then if you like conversations like this, we will also be hosting one of those next Monday with a couple of student entrepreneurs. They're actually brothers who have both founded multiple companies. And so I dropped both those links in the chat. Anything else from you all that you'd like to share as kind of closing thoughts? No? Awesome. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I just want to say thank you again, and thank you to everybody who tuned on.